Hi, everyone. Well, today I'm coming to you from the grounds of the University of Virginia. I'm here because they're having a lunch here to honor my sister Emily, who died of pancreatic cancer. And every year there's a lunch where scholarships are given to worthy high school students because my sister cared deeply about education. She was a state senator here and running for lieutenant governor with Mark Warner when she was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer and forced to drop out of the race. So that is why I'm in Charlottesville today, here at Mr. Jefferson's University. And I can't think of a more appropriate venue to talk about our democracy. Across the globe, as many of you may know, democracy is on the decline. What are the forces that have contributed to this new world disorder, if you will? And what are the signs that it is happening right here in the United States of America? Ruth Ben-Ghiat understands the strongman's playbook perhaps better than anyone, having spent her career studying them as a historian at New York University. Ruth, thank you so much for talking with us today. I'm curious, given your expertise on authoritarian rulers, how do you see Donald Trump following the playbook you've become all too familiar with?
Thanks for having me on, Katie. So I've been writing about Donald Trump since 2015, 16, and even on the campaign trail initially, it was clear to me he was marketing himself not as a Democratic leader with a small d, but remember his campaign statement in January 2016, I could stand on Fifth Avenue and shoot someone and I wouldn't lose any followers. And I still think about that every day because this is what authoritarians do even before they come to office. They associate themselves with violence, they cultivate a leader cult, they attack the press and judges. And so all of this, it has been going on for a long time. And then, now his first term, you could say, was almost a rehearsal in which his desires were constrained, and that's no longer true. So what we're seeing now at truly rapid speed, and that's unusual, the speed at which things are going, is a full out assault on our democracy, on all of our institutions, paralyzing them, wrecking them, but also, like purging the civil service, again, puffing up his leader cult, taking steps to, ignore rule of law and many, many other things. This is straight out of the authoritarian playbook. It's just unfolding in a more accelerated manner.
Let me ask you about the speed in which this is happening, Ruth. You say this is unusual. I would think it would be pretty illustrative of how an individual like this works because of the idea of flooding the zone that Steve Bannon talks about.
Mhm.
The idea that things are coming so fast and furiously, it's hard for the media to cover them and it's hard for people to react to them. And yet, this is unusual.
Yes. So the theory of it is actually, which I wrote a piece in 2017 for CNN called Trump and Bannon's Coup in the Making, about this exact flooding the zone, shock and awe stuff. And it's really strange to see it unfolding now. And again, they were not able to do it in his first term. We all forget about like exactly how bad the first term was for our democracy. We've had the kind of amnesia about parts of it. So now, so, you know, when you look at the autocrats who we hear about every day, sitting autocrats like, Putin or Erdogan or Orban, the GOP muse, Orban in Hungary, and we look at their early months or even their first year of their rule, they were not proceeding at this pace. It took them a long time to consolidate their power, to start, actually, let's say, deporting people, going after people. And so that is one of the things that is very unusual, the rate at which this has been happening. And also another innovation, you could say, of the authoritarian playbook is that, there's only one guy on the cover of my book, Strongmen. And in Russia, we talk about the power vertical, and there's only one person, Putin, at the top. Well, here we have two guys. we have an unelected co-leader, Elon Musk, who's been able to, bring his digital and physical shock troops in a way and take over government agencies and wreck them at will, even locking out our elected representatives, as has happened several times. So that is very unusual. And that is why there's also been the pace of destruction, is because you have two people working on it. And the final part is that Project 2025, I really see that as having been like a shadow government in waiting. They were training people, highly politicized civil servants. And so they were ready to go. They used their time out of office very well. And so for all these reasons, we're seeing something that honestly, it resembles the aftermath of a coup. Now, Trump came in by election, but the pace resembles an aftermath of a coup.
You talk about Elon Musk, and he also brings his considerable, unprecedented wealth to bear. That is additionally a powerful tool for him, as well as his platforms and his really bully pulpit, unelected bully
Mhm.
pulpit.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned this, Katie, because we're hearing the word oligarch a lot, which was not anything that applied to the US necessarily before. And the classic oligarchs, the best known case is Russia. They are people who are outside the government. They are, business tycoons or media tycoons. And the leader makes up bargains called authoritarian bargains. I talk about this in my book. And the whole point is that they are outside the government. And so, for example, in India, Modi had a kind of crony who's very rich buy up a major media outlet. And the same thing has happened in Hungary. So you don't need state control of the media anymore directly like you had in the old-fashioned dictatorships or China. You can have an ally buy up a media property and then it performs for you. Now, Musk is a private individual who has been given, I think I see Doge as like it was created so he could infiltrate a sovereign nation, because this is someone who had everything in a way. He had, Twitter, which he made into X. So he had a major, social media platform. He was the richest man in the world, but he did not have a way to get inside a sovereign government and re-engineer it so his businesses won't be investigated and all of that stuff. And that's what Trump gave him in return, probably for all the financial aid he gave to the campaign and ongoing. And so we have the oligarch model is different because the main oligarch has been inside our government. So that too is like a departure, and it makes it more difficult to know how to respond.
We'll talk about how to respond because certainly many of my followers and viewers, I think that is the number one question. How do
Yeah.
you fight these forces? But you say the Republican Party has become an autocratic party as well. Can you expand upon that for us?
Yeah. So I've been saying this for some years, because an autocratic party is a party that it has become a personal tool of the president. And Trump has been working at this project for a very long time. And every time he had a challenge, like back in 2019 when he had his impeachment hearings and stuff, he tightened the vise of loyalty. And so by 2020, that party, when there was the 2020 election, a party has a platform. The GOP declined to have a platform other than supporting Trump. And so this is what we call hollowing out, when you hollow out an institution or a party because they no longer have any ideals and values that are separate from the leader. And they also start to embrace things that are very illiberal. Some of them, they don't want separation of church and state. They've institutionalized their racism or misogyny. So both in the dynamics and in the content of it, they've become an autocratic party. And then you had January 6th, where they were targeted. Mike Pence was even targeted, and that really whipped them into line. And one of the saddest things that happened is in 2022, they actually issued a statement, an official statement that said January 6th was, quote, legitimate political discourse. And when I saw that, I thought, well, this this process is complete, because this was violence unleashed against them. And they're saying with that statement that violence is a legitimate way to deal with democratic transitions, with transitions of power that don't go your way. You can use violence. And that's what has been going on in the authoritarian world since early fascism, early communism. You don't use deliberation, you don't use laws, you use violence if things to change history. So those are some of the reasons I call the GOP an autocratic party.
Do you see any cracks in this? We have seen of late some Republican members of Congress
Mhm.
start to make noises about tariffs, for example. Do you
Yes.
think there will be a moment in time where Republicans actually step up and say enough, or we need to stop this before it's too late?
I've been waiting for this. I just published a piece yesterday in my Substack called Lucid, which is called Autocratic Backfire. And one of the problems that we have versus other countries is that we don't have a multi-party system. We only have these two giant parties. And so we've seen this with Liz Cheney, Adam Kinzinger, people who uh, are still for the rule of law and they're lifelong Republicans. They don't have anywhere else to go. Nor can you have like people who are getting disaffected, ally with other opposition. They become a kind of multi-party opposition. So it's very difficult for people in the system of the party to go against Trump because he's also a very formidable enemy in that way. It's like my way or you're my enemy. And so we've had articles where Gabriel Sherman published an article in Vanity Fair where they're afraid, GOP representatives are afraid for their physical safety, and this is an authoritarian sign. But the tariffs, which are a classic example of an autocrat who has structured things so that he only has sycophants and yes men around him or yes women, and he thinks he's been emboldened, and also here we have he's been emboldened to think he's a genius and that his instincts are right. And we have religious institutions telling him that he everything he does is by divine will. And so this is a pattern in history where a leader will make truly idiotic decisions, won't listen to anyone, and that's when the elites who have political elites in this case you're asking about, but other elites, business elites, will start backing away because finally they understand that this person is not fit for leadership and will do anything to even harm the country, wreck the economy, as long as he gets his way. So now Trump has, paused the tariffs, but I think this has been a wake-up call for many people, and you've seen some GOP members of Congress finally breaking with this kind of tyrannical hold in the last days and weeks.
You're so right, though. He surrounds himself with these
Yeah.
yes men and women. And I think we saw that yesterday as everyone was praising him around the table for pausing the tariff and the stock
Terrible.
market climbing again as if he deserved credit for that. It was truly bizarre.
I watched that and it's just painful to watch, and doubly painful as an American today, but because this is a highly toxic environment and it leads to more disasters and larger disasters. I don't know how much more of a disaster economically he could have wrought, because it's not just America, it's our trade, it's globally. And yet they're so anchored to his cult of personality, and they're still so intimidated by him, and why they don't realize that if they band together and go against him, that is they could do a lot to constrain him, because every time people have capitulated to him, and not only the obeying in advance of Bezos and Zuckerberg, but all the law firms and all the other things we've been seeing, all of that makes him more empowered and more narcissistic and more feeling he's infallible. And so in fascist Italy, the slogan was literally Mussolini is always right. And there were posters in the streets. There were signs in buildings, Mussolini is always right. And then Mussolini was not right. And he led Italy into a war and people got bombed, and you know how it ended up. But this is a syndrome, it's like a pathology of autocratic rule, and it's very painful for me to see us living through it. And so when those people, they're praising him still, even after this disaster, he's not going to learn anything from that. He's just going to feel that he can do these things again.
And feel more emboldened as he did
Yes.
gave the speech the other night and said that all these countries are calling and kissing his ass.
That's so it's actually a very dangerous time, because this has been a huge test case, and in his mind, he has won. They're kissing his ass. His own people are lauding him around the table, and this is when they decide to become even more grandiose, and they could start wars. So in the past, this is when leaders have either gotten into a truly stupid war or increase their involvement in a doomed war. So they do things like that. And I'm worried because he's already been talking about Greenland. I'm going to take Greenland, quote, one way or the other. And then all the destructive stuff with Canada. But the more he gets into this bubble mentality, and the more people, more to the point, the more his enablers allow him to be like that, the more dangerous and unstable things become.
What about amassing wealth? There have been Democrats and other political observers who believe that this tariff whiplash has been a way for them to increase their wealth. And in fact, Donald Trump even put on
Yeah.
Truth Social, it is a great time to buy. What do you make of that?
Yeah, that's Senator Chris Murphy's been such an eloquent, explainer of everything going on. Was on social media talking about, like, if we had rule of law still, this would be massive, scandal. It's corruption. Yeah, there's something to that, because what is painful to understand is that for autocrats, they couldn't care less about public welfare or actually governing. They're not interested in governing. That's why Trump is golfing all the time, and he did that in his first term. They are interested in using public office to amass private wealth. So public office is just like a springboard for them to get rich. And in Hungary, again, Mr. Model for the GOP, Hungary has become impoverished after more than a decade of Orban being there. But his family and his cronies have become so rich that there's being documentaries are being made. There's one that just came out in France about how rich they've become off of the business of governing. So this, when I saw that dynamic happen, and indeed him posting about it, this was an invitation for everybody to he was telling people he's going to be able to make them rich, and so the mass of the people becomes impoverished, and the elite, the true elite, become far, far richer, and so they will put up with what he does, no matter how bad it gets for the country, and that's it's called the authoritarian bargain.
Before we talk about some authoritarian leaders who you've studied, I wanted to ask you about this new executive order seeking retribution against former senior Homeland Security official Miles Taylor and Chris Krebs, who I actually know, who served as director of the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. Both men spoke out against Donald Trump's claim that the rigged election of 2020, and he did say he would seek retribution if he was elected. And now he is basically trying to sic the Justice Department through an executive order on these two men simply because they disagreed with him.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me how that fits into the playbook.
And I thought Miles Taylor had a very good response on social media, saying that he expected this, and that dissent is not illegal. Um, they didn't just disagree, they disagreed on the foundational big lie about the 2020 election. Because who would Donald Trump be if he didn't have that big lie that he actually did not win the election? It's actually extraordinary. There is no case of somebody working in a full democracy with a totally pluralistic media who was able to convince tens of millions of people of a pretty giant verifiable fact about the results of a presidential election. And yet Donald Trump is so skilled as a propagandist that he was able to do this. And without that lie, there wouldn't have been a January 6th because he had to undo the monstrous wrong that the election was stolen. So 2020 election, who said what about it and dissenting on that was that's why he's going after those two. And of course, it's going to be a test case because every autocrat eventually goes after political opposition. They do it in different ways. And he rehearsed this. One of the ways is you harass them financially, or this happened to James Comey and Andrew McCabe earlier, right? They were harassed with, tax investigations, and that's a classic Putin. A lot of this stuff originated with Putin. Some of it's much older, other dictators. But this is a test case for Krebs and Taylor, and we should follow it closely because it could be extended to other people afterwards.
My husband and I were talking this morning, Ruth, and he says in the continuum of these illegal acts and this corruption, is there an inflection point where it can be stopped? He likened it to the frog in the boiling water, although this is a rapid boil, as we discussed earlier. But is there a key moment where the forces of good and pro-democracy citizens and public officials can stop him? Or, have we passed that point?
No, we haven't passed that point. And one of the kind of principles I go by, I've learned from studying, there's a chapter on resistance in my book, and I've interviewed dissidents and activists and stuff in my newsletter, is that you have to use every tool that you have when you have it. So, for example, I wrote a piece in my newsletter about Cory Booker doing his, de facto filibuster. That's somebody who was using the tools and the spaces that he had at his disposal to make a statement. Because if we can think, oh, we can wait to start protesting, or we can wait to start doing this, but you never know if you're going to have those spaces and those rights tomorrow if you have somebody like Trump in power. So that's one principle. But we're already seeing, it was unexpectedly robust participation for the April 5th hands-off protests. And I saw an article, and I think in the Atlantic, that today perhaps protests are going to be more decentralized, but there's many of them. So people are already angry, and there were a lot of Republicans and independent voters at those protests, because it's when they see their Social Security checks, are not going to come, or they're not that mechanism, that bureaucracy, which has worked very well for decades, is getting messed up, or the public health scandals. This is just so tragic that we're creating the situations and the conditions for the spread of disease in our country. It's as though an evil brain wants to weaken our population economically, public health, education. It's a kind of sabotage. And I believe I am an optimist about human nature. And one of my maxims is never underestimate the American people. And I do believe that there will be, in different forums, it will take a widespread reaction against this. What does stopping him look like? It will probably require pressure on him that will finally lead him to, even if only temporarily, or to reduce what he wants to do. And that happened in his first term. He's the same guy he was in the first term. It's just that there was more constraints. But you have to use the spaces and the tools you have now, because who knows how long they'll be around.
I wanted to ask you about the role of the media, because you described Donald Trump as a master propagandist or something along those lines. And it seems to me in the current media ecosystem, people are living in their own bubble. As a friend of mine says, getting affirmation instead of information. How do you break through, given the fact that people are relying on media sources that are not necessarily objective, but are propping up Donald Trump and his whole team and telling them what he's doing is right or rationalizing his decisions and keeping them from negative news to ensure that they continue to support him.
Yeah, I'm glad you said keeping them from negative news because the study of propaganda, I have a chapter in my book about propaganda. It's not just broadcasting lies, so the noise, it's also silence. You have to silence other news. And you have to have both those things. So you have to silence the truth and broadcast the lies. And there would be, as we well know, there would be no Trump without Fox, right? And Fox is still being shown on military bases around the world. So this is a formidable problem, as well as all of the Joe Rogans and all of the podcasts and the manosphere, which is very right wing. There's all of this. So one thing that we can do as individuals is everybody seems to have in their family or their communities somebody who is, I call it politely, dwelling in the disinformation tunnel, um, who is deluded, is still, it could be MAGA, it could be MAGA plus the public health stuff. But I think it's time, the tariff episode and the disasters that are going to be reaching people's everyday lives if they haven't already, this is a very propitious time to reach out and have conversations with those people. And it's not easy. I have members of my family. My mother was radicalized in England watching Russia Today. And there was a long period I couldn't talk to her. And I would send her things that I had written for CNN, and I'm her own daughter. And she would say, "Oh, that's fake news." So I know firsthand this is very difficult. But there's an opening. I truly believe now there is an opening because he is doing things at a scale of incompetence. This whole administration, the people he's appointed, Hegseth, Kennedy. So I think there's an opening to have conversations with people, and that might seem like a very small thing to do. Also, to urge the what is it, 80 million Americans who didn't vote, it's nice time to urge them to show them that their vote actually matters because this is the outcome from not voting. Not voting is an action, actually. So that is one thing that we can do to burst through these kind of echo chambers and bubbles created by propaganda.
Ruth, I was struck by this fact that over half of the world's population now lives under some form of illiberal rule. We have seen authoritarian governments really like expanding all across the globe. And I've often wondered what forces these countries have in common that are allowing these autocrats to emerge and have such a hold on these populations. Are there specific forces that exist that create fertile soil for this to happen?
Yeah, that's a big question. It's a great question. Part of it is like this kind of autocratic, charismatic demagogue playbook, and they watch each other. So Trump, in his case, he doesn't read, but the reason he talks about, Xi and Putin, like the worst people in the world all the time positively, is that he learns from them. And you know that she has been watching what happens to Putin about Ukraine, if he thinks about Taiwan. So they learn from each other. But so that's part of it. You have these people like Bukele, who's wildly popular in El Salvador, despite being highly repressive. They really know what they're doing, the younger ones, especially with social media. And so they have these nationally specific variations of this charismatic demagogue. I alone can fix it. And this is really appealing to people. So part of it is their skill at marketing themselves, even though if you study the history, the things they say are exactly the same things. One of the most recurring things is, I am going to stop the immigrants coming from over the border to commit crimes, rape your women, ruin our gene pool, whatever. the Great Replacement theory, that, you know, who was talking about that even before Hitler? Mussolini. He was all about to the he said cradles are empty and cemeteries are full in Italy because the wrong people are having babies. So these are they know how to um, say things, and they say them in a very effective way too, that are going to evoke fear and insecurity in people and get them, in most extreme situations, get them into a state of existential dread so they will accept even violence against, say, immigrants or in the past Jews or Muslims. So that's one thing. But the other part of this, very important, is that democracy has evolved in many places in a way that is very disaffecting to people. It's created gross inequality. It's created loneliness, and there's many studies of this. And so it's been really, think about the far right movements. Or MAGA. He gives you a hat. He tells you you're part of a community. He tells you he loves you. Even on January 6th, he said he loved you. Um, and so they make people feel part of something when they have felt that they were forgotten. And Trump was very smart in 2016 saying, "You're the forgotten, you're forgotten no longer." And so part of it is their skill, and part of it is democracy has not, when it's been very following neoliberalism, privatization, taking away people's social net, taking away community, and social media obviously has a lot to do with this too. Um, that has created the conditions, regardless of the country, for authoritarianism to take hold.
What about immigration? Because I remember being in Hungary, Ruth, a few years ago, and there was so much anti-immigration sentiment
Yeah,
boiling up. People were mad that people were coming into Hungary from Syria and that they were sleeping, by the train tracks. And I feel like both immigration and multiculturalism feeds into this as well. Do you agree?
it does if you let it. There
No,
are
I'm not
two.
saying it necessarily should, but I feel like
Yeah,
those things get weaponized. And I think
yes,
in some cases, not in all, but you know, uh, immigration can be destabilizing
yes.
and hard on social services and the very safety nets that you describe.
Absolutely. And we can look around and see which nations have done a better job. It depends on the resources they have. It depends but immigration it comes into, and wherever it's increasing, it comes into a certain political environment. And you can look at the places where in some countries it becomes fuel for far right populists to take hold, for example. Um, but it's interesting in Poland, where they were successful in 2023 in turning back authoritarianism. They had a far right government in power for like I think 8, 9 years, and and very anti-immigrant. And so what the opposition did is they talked about immigration, but they also exposed the hypocrisy of the government, where they were preaching and anti-immigrant and in a racist way rhetoric, but they were also doing like a visa buying scheme so that certain immigrants could come in if they had money. And this
Well,
was
that's
very,
what Donald Trump is doing with that gold
yes.
card.
Yes, but in Poland, they were able to use this as it's a different country, and Poles, they suffered through Nazi occupation and then many, many decades of communism, so they know the stakes. But this was a key thing that was very successful in opening people's eyes to the hypocrisy and corruption of that government, and it helped them turn out people and get rid of that government. But it's one of the biggest challenges. In fact, Joe Biden was having many deportation flights. So a lot of this, the reason I'm talking about the messaging is that it's very important, like how you message this. Today, message is everything. Um, and I think that the Biden and Harris, policies on immigration were less liberal, and yet they were depicted as by Fox, et cetera, as having open borders and anarchy and chaos. And that's the classic authoritarian message. And that convinced people and bolstered Donald Trump to his "I'm going to do mass deportations." Remember the rallies with all the people holding those signs for mass deportation?
Yes.
That that was scary, but that's the product of this cycle.
You have studied world leaders, and Trump has made no secret of his admiration for the prime minister of Hungary. I think he even mentioned him during one of the debates, or his only debate. Uh, what is it about Viktor Orban that has such a hold on Trump? And what has he done in Hungary that Trump may try to emulate in this country?
So Orban has been extremely effective at installing something called electoral autocracy. And what that means is today you don't have to shut down elections like in communism, fascism. You don't need a one-party state. You can keep elections going and you can keep other parties going, but you game the system so that it's very hard for the opposition to succeed. And how do you do that? First, you domesticate the media. And Orban, it's this incredible. In 2018, Orban got the owners of 500 media properties. These are people who each owned, they're wealthy, big players, to donate their properties to a government allied foundation. And so in one fell swoop, he set the stage for what is now a estimated 90% government domestication of the media, but not old-fashioned state control of the media. You also have to go after the judiciary. And why? Because remember, after 2020, over 60 judges in our country turned back Trump's fake election fraud claims. And some of those judges had been appointed by him. So Orban has totally domesticated the judiciary. So, because there's that connection between elections and judiciary. So, those are some things, and he's done other things. So, he is the master of electoral autocracy. So, he can call his state, he calls it a liberal democracy. There's actually nothing democratic about it, but that's what he calls it. And so, same in Turkey, where Erdogan says, "Oh, there's a ballot box. I'm not a dictator. We have elections." But what has Erdogan done? That's an unfolding story. He couldn't stand to have an actual rival for the presidential elections. Is one of my democratic heroes, Ekrem İmamoğlu, the mayor of Istanbul. So he's been doing things for years to try and get rid of İmamoğlu as a viable candidate. And finally, recently, he had him arrested. And so that's the actual outcome of electoral autocracy. And so Trump watches this, and the Heritage Foundation has been long allied with Orban. So Orban it's not just Trump, he has very, very powerful backers in this country. And that's why the CPAC has even met several times, the Conference for Political Action, epicenter of Republican ideology. It
The
meets in
conservative
Budapest.
political
Yeah,
action.
sorry.
Yeah.
Thank you. It meets in Budapest, so there's very, very deep ties. But that's why, because Orban has mastered the art of gaming elections so that you have the elections, but you somehow stay in power.
Do you think that Donald Trump's actions will embolden autocrats all over the world, and that this trend will continue even stronger?
It already is emboldening autocrats, and it's really there's all these news reports that China has accelerated its timeline for whatever it might do with Taiwan, and also Erdogan. The Turkish opposition has had a report out now that before Erdogan arrested his chief rival Imamoglu, the head of the opposition party, much beloved, he got Trump's okay. And Erdogan and Trump have lots of ties going back many years too. So the all-powerful, superpower United States, if you have somebody like Trump there, and he's made it very clear that he's not going to use any of the tools that might have been used to put pressure on people for, autocratic aggressions, then it's like a free-for-all. If you've also basically de facto come out as an ally of Putin, one of the most murderous in the world, and also praised, the leader of North Korea, then there's no bottom. And so we're going to see more and more empowerment. Also, Netanyahu, who had the ceasefire, then he starts the war again with Trump's blessing. So all of this is leading to a more unstable world.
I know you have to go, but I wanted to close by asking you, despite the fact you call yourself an optimist, Ruth, what worries you the most?
I I worry about um, the the empowerment of Trump because of what we talked before. I worry about the empowerment of Trump because too few people have had the courage to confront him, and too few people are who have power in this country are putting the country first. And we could be led into a disaster that, as we see with the tariffs, is already affecting the entire world because of the size and importance of America. And some of the autocrats I've studied, like Chile or even Turkey, which is a powerful regional force, they're not the United States. The United States is unique in its reach and its power. It's a nuclear power. And so what we do reverberates around the world. So I can only hope that there will be more people who patriotically put country first and will rein this leader in.
Ruth Ben-Ghiat, thank you so much for your time. I could spend hours talking to you. Maybe you'll come back and we can discuss why the Democratic Party seems so feckless to many people and how we've moved from anticipatory obedience to full out obedience, as evidenced by these law firms and media organizations that are caving to Donald Trump. So hopefully we can have another discussion soon.
Yeah, I'd like that.